Previously, we have seen how to work mainly with one-way bindings when working with label controls, but it is also possible to modify the source properties through controls that allow it, for example, the entry control. Let's do an example of this. We're going to return to app.xaml.cs and we're going to assign as a start page the page called main page. Then we're going to go to the main page.xaml page. And if you remember, we had created a set of label controls which we're going to replace with entry controls. I'm then going to change the control definition to the entry control in each of these elements. Let's test the application to see that everything is still working correctly. Here we have the application, we click on the button and we can already see the entry controls. Let's go to the code behind and we're going to carry out some modifications. I'm going to create an instance of the type person at the field level of the class. Then I'm going to create a field called person, which is equal to a new instance of a person. Next, I'm going to cut this pair of assignments I made earlier and paste them as part of the constructor. I'm going to remove the variable creation to directly use the field we created. If we start the application running one more time, we see that everything is still working correctly. With this, we are creating and assigning the instance from the constructor. Now, let's modify the properties of the instance of the person when we click on the button. Then we write person.name equal, for example, Peter. We will indicate person.phone equal to a set of zeros. Person.address equals to new address. What should happen is that once we click on the button, the person's information should be updated and the different values should be assigned to the graphical interface. Let's see if this works correctly. To do this, let's place a breakpoint. Let's start the execution. We already have the application here. Let's click on the button. We arrive at the breakpoint. If we examine the properties of the instance of the person, notice that the information in the instance has already been updated. Therefore, theoretically, this change should be reflected in the graphical interface. We're going to click on Continue, but notice that the information has not been updated in the graphical interface, even though the instance information has changed. The problem is that the graphical interface needs to be notified as soon as a change occurs in some property to carry out the corresponding update. For this, we must implement a special interface called iNotifyPropertyChanged. We will do this by analyzing who owns the property that is being modified. In our case, we are directly modifying the properties of the model called person. Therefore, we have to go to the model. Let's open the file called person.cs, and in this class, let's implement the iNotifyPropertyChanged interface. We have to import the namespace that is needed, and once we have imported the namespace, we see an error because we have to implement the interface. Let's implement it, and as a result, we see an event of type propertyChanged event handler called propertyChanged. What is normally done to fire this event is to create a method that we can invoke once an assignment is performed on a property. What we will do then will be to create a void method which is called onPropertyChanged. We're going to indicate that we want to pass as parameter a parameter of the type string that is called propName and that has by default a null value. Once we have done this, we have to fill in the information of the method. Although Visual Studio recommends a line of code that we can use, we will use a different implementation. I'm going to indicate propertyChanged, which is the name of the event. I'm going to check if there is a valid event reference, and if there is, we'll invoke the event. Let's pass as first parameter the reference of this same class. And then we must send a parameter of type propertyChanged event args. Let's create a new instance of this type, passing as parameter the name of the property. As part of the latest versions of .NET, we have a feature that allows us to ignore the name of the property from which the method is invoked. It is the color member name attribute. We will have to import the system runtime compiler services namespace. In this way, when we invoke the method, we will automatically obtain the name of who invokes it, whether it is a property or a method. This is how the method looks like at the end, which I recommend you save so that you can reuse it in your different projects. Once we have created the method that will fire the event, we have to invoke it from the properties once the assignment of a value takes place. And what is the common place where these assignments take place? Well, inside the property, it is in the setter. Let's then indicate that we want to create a full property for this property, indicating that we want to convert to a full property, and then indicate that for the set, we want a block body. Once we have done this, after the assignment to the local field, we can invoke the onPropertyChange method. Let's run the application to see how it behaves. We see the application with the initial data. Let's click on the button. Let's remove the breakpoint. And look how this time, value of the entry control has been updated without doing anything else. We can return to the other properties and we proceed to modify each one of them, creating a complete property first and creating a body for the setter. We invoke onPropertyChange again and do the same with the property named address. Once we have made these changes, let's start the application to see that everything works correctly. We click on the button and the information has been updated. Now, there is a case with which we must be especially careful. We're going to make a change in the mainpage.saml.cs file. Instead of modifying the properties of the instance, I'm going to proceed to create a new instance of the class and reuse this information. Once this change is made, let's test the application. And we see that the graphical user interface has not been updated. That is happening because we are applying a change directly on the property called person. This is the reference that we are modifying and not each of the properties as we had before. It is something that we must take into account. In the specific case of this page, we should implement the iNotifyPropertyChange interface. However, notice that once we add the interface, it appears correctly. We have no errors. That means that this interface is already implemented by default in a content page. However, if we perform the task of updating the properties from this file, we will start mixing the code behind with the business logic, which is not optimal. To solve this problem, a pattern called MVVM is used, which we will see later.